In this lesson, we're going to take a look at our workspace and tools to make sure that everything is organized and prepared for our digital painting process. So let's get started. A lot of times, people ask, what size should I work in? So let's look at image and go down to image size. And when you go in here, the thing that I want you to pay attention to the most is here, resolution. I want to make sure that you have your resolution set to 300. As far as the size of the canvas, mine is 11 by 17 because of what I'm going to be showing and what I'm going to be working on. But if you feel that for your character, an 8.5 by 11 or a square or a portrait layout works better, then feel free to do that. Use whatever works best for your character and what you're going to be painting. All I want you to focus on as far as this goes is making sure that this is 300 DPI, because we are going to be talking later on at the end of the course on how to export something for print. In order to do that, we want to make sure that artwork is at the right resolution. So let's just hit OK there. And then one more thing real quick while we're on image mode, RGB color. Depending on how you set up your canvas, you might hit OK and not realize that it's set to CMYK, especially if you're doing a high 300 DPI resolution. So just make sure if it's not already set to RGB color, you could come in here, image mode, and then RGB color, make sure it's set to that. That's going to give us the most access to the things that we need to do in terms of tools and filters and stuff like that to get through this digital painting process. Let's talk about layers. I want you to look at the way I have this set up here. The names don't matter, it's as much as the structure. You want to make sure that everything is titled. You want to, as you're working, as you're moving along, you want to go ahead and title everything. You want to have everything in folders so that you know what's what. Two reasons why you want to do this is for your own personal work. This will make it easier for you to know what part you're painting, what you're doing, that you're not painting on the wrong layer. It's easier to mask things and just kind of get through the whole process more efficiently. But if you work with a team, I should be able to work on something and then hand it over to you. And when you open it, you should know what everything is, how everything is labeled is very accurate to what is on the canvas. Moving along to Navigator. This window here is crucial when I'm painting, and I'll tell you why. As we're drawing something, you get in the zone and then you kind of zoom into little areas because you want to start adding details. But when you do this, sometimes we lose sight of the overall image. And so with this navigator, it gives you a 100% preview of what your image looks like at all times. So even though you're zoomed in over here, I'm always kind of peeking over here and making sure that the overall image is reading well. Now, depending on what size monitor you use, I use a pretty big monitor, so even here it's still a big preview of the artwork. Even when I'm zoomed out this way, I still like to look at this as a small thumbnail. And good rule of thumb is that if your image is reading clearly here, if you know that an arm is supposed to be an arm and the leg is a leg, and you could read everything clearly, then chances are that you're doing pretty good as far as your image reading well in terms of light, value, structure, and those kinds of things, which we'll talk about later on. Before I move into the next thing, which is brushes, let me just look at this here. I wanted to point this out, your color here. A lot of times it's just kind of collapsible like this. If you know that you're going to be painting, just pop this out and have it just open at all times. I use this color wheel. You might have like Q Cube or something like that. And if you feel comfortable with something else, something like this, if this is what you use, then that's fine. But I will be using the color wheel for the course. This is what makes the most sense for me and the way I work. And if you wanted to follow along, feel free to use this. But again, I want you to be comfortable.
Now, this is not an intro to Photoshop course, so if you do want more of that, you can check out the Domestica course by Carles Marsal. Now let's get back to our workspace.
Now moving into brushes. For this course, I did want to take a look at other brushes out there, and I have played around with several brush packs. But if I can be honest, this pack by Loish, Loish, this is what I've been using for like the past 2 years. You can feel free to play around with these brushes. I dropped my favorite brushes. I dropped it all in the resources folder for you to check out. If you really want to follow close along with me, you can use these 2 brushes. Let's start off with this oil pastel brush. I do like this brush because it gives me a nice rough edge. And if you see here, it's kind of hard to blend with another color because it's spitting out almost 100% paint. And sometimes that's good, but when I'm painting and blending colors, I like to always have this on up here. When you have this on, as you press down on your stylus pen, it uses that pressure for the opacity. So when you have that on, this also kind of helps build up paint strokes. So now when I have those 2 things turned on, usually my flow I have at around between 25 and 35, depending on what brush I'm using. But I usually have it there. Now when I try to blend, it comes out depending on how hard I press. And what I like about this brush is this dry brush kind of edge that it has to it. It really feels like natural media. I like for my work to kind of feel like something that was painted naturally versus something that feels too digital. The other brush that I use is this one. Now this one's going to be a lot softer. With this brush, same thing. When you have these things turned on, it makes it relatively easy to blend. But this brush is not going to give you that rough edge, which is fine. I use this brush quite a bit actually. But again, depending on how your brush strokes are, you could still handle your edges in a way that gives you a hard edge if you want one, and then blend in and get really soft in other areas. So it really just depends on what you're trying to achieve. For the most part, I typically use brushes that create that kind of soft, painterly kind of feel. So if you look at my work, it kind of carries those textures, and that kind of feel carries throughout. So even though here this has a soft edge, this brush, you could see that it still has just as much texture as this one, as this dry brush does. When you have your brush selected, so like now I have this soft brush, if I go and I select my eraser, which is here, you see my eraser is a different texture. It's the other dry brush. I like for my eraser to match my brush. So if I'm using this soft brush here, then when I want to erase, I go here, you see it's that rough brush, I go back up here and I make it the soft brush so that my eraser matches whatever brush I'm using.
So now that you saw how I got my workspace set up, it's important that we do that because all of those little things that we take a look at are going to help us be more efficient in our digital painting process. So in this next lesson, we're going to take a look at spheres and we're going to understand light and shadow and how that works.